Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honour to speak to Bill 17 tonight, and I appreciate the enthusiasm from the Minister for my remarks. I look forward to meeting his expectations. It's always challenging to follow my colleague from Scarborough. She's a passionate public speaker and has a booming voice, so I will do my best at this late hour to meet the moment. So, Madam Speaker, let's start with the obvious. Ontario has a housing crisis. But it's not just one crisis, Madam Speaker. I would suggest that it's two. In some communities, red tape, financial delays, and politics are stopping housing from getting started, or in some cases, getting finished. These are the issues I think the government believes Bill 17 will help to address. Madam Speaker, I sat on City Council in Ottawa with councillors who would vote against almost all new housing construction. They would vote against housing in the suburbs. They would vote against infill developments in the core of the city. They would lift delegated authority and lengthen the approvals process over the smallest of issues. And Madam Speaker, if you were to drive by many of these developments today, years later, one would be hard-pressed to see what the problem was or even identify what the new construction is compared to the rest. As I said, I suspect these are some of the issues the government believes Bill 17 and some of their other measures will address. But there's another element to and aspect of the housing crisis the government really doesn't have a plan for. In places like Orleans, many new homes are being built. In fact, it's one of, if not the fastest growing part of the City of Ottawa. But as the houses are being built and the community and new neighbours are moving in, the roads, the bus routes, the schools, and the protective services aren't keeping up. Families are stuck in traffic, they're waiting for schools to be built, and they're hoping that the ambulance isn't coming from 15 minutes away. Now, this isn't a problem unique to Orleans or to Ottawa. It happens in new communities across Ontario. Whether you're in a booming suburb, a small town, or the biggest of cities, the cost of buying a home is growing further and further out of reach, especially for young couples and growing middle-class families. So, yes, Madam Speaker, I'll be voting for Bill 17 here at second reading because we need to act. We need to cut red tape and provide greater clarity and definition to the industry that works to build the homes we so desperately need. But let's not confuse support with satisfaction. While this bill might move the needle, it doesn't meet the moment. Madam Speaker, you can't call it smart growth if you're building homes without the roads. And you can't call it affordability if the average family can't afford to buy the front door. While Bill 17 shifts the gears, the truck, unfortunately, is still stuck heading in the same direction. Now, as I've said already, and I think others this evening have pointed out quite clearly, Madam Speaker, we have a housing affordability crisis in our province. But when I talk about affordability, I'm not talking about subsidies or gimmicks or giant bloated bureaucracies like some other parties in the legislature propose. I'm talking about the dream that if you work hard and play by the rules, that you can own a home. Not someday, but soon. Ask any young family in my riding, and they're doing everything right. They've gone to school. They've done an apprenticeship. They've landed good jobs, and they're ready to put down roots. But what they're finding, Madam Speaker, is sticker shock. Townhomes that used to be the starting point. Townhomes in Orleans going for $750,000, Madam Speaker. Detached homes for well over $1 million. And that's in a suburb of Ottawa. It's a much, much bigger problem in Toronto and the GTA. Now, that's not sustainable. Many young families are putting their dreams on hold. They're renting longer, occupying units that should otherwise be available to the next family coming up the housing ladder. And that problem filters all the way down the system, Madam Speaker. Now, we've heard some in this House claim that there's a big difference between investing in shelters and deeply affordable housing and building homes in the suburbs. And of course, the type of home that is needed in those circumstances is different. But you need to invest in and support and encourage the entire spectrum of housing if we're going to solve the process. Because if people who could otherwise afford a home 10 or 15 years ago can't now buy one and are stuck in a rental, then that next family can't come up and you backlog the entire housing ladder, Madam Speaker. So many families are putting their dreams on hold, as I've said. But, Madam Speaker, housing affordability shouldn't mean settling. It should mean starting strong in a community where you can put down real roots. And for too many people in Orleans and in Ottawa and across Ontario, that just isn't possible at the moment. Now, Madam Speaker, there are some who want to blame developers for this problem. We heard that earlier tonight as well. I'm not going to do that, because we won't solve the housing shortage by attacking the people that are building the homes. Are there bad actors? Of course there are. There are bad actors in every sector. But in my experience, most builders want to be part of the solution. They want to get shovels in the ground. They want to build high-quality neighborhoods, and they want to meet the growing demand. They want to build the parks where our kids learn to play and learn to ride a bike. They want to be involved in solving issues around commuting, and neighborhood connectivity. I remember when I was on City Council, Madam Speaker, a very important road in South Orleans, which is, as I said, one of the fastest growing parts of the city, Brian Coburn Boulevard, was stuck. It was, the city didn't have the money to build it. The homes that were needed to pay the development charges to allow the city to have the money to build it couldn't be built unless the road got built. And so it was this classic conundrum. Nothing could move. The home builders were very happy to work with the city to advance the construction of that road by years, reducing the overall cost. And lo and behold, because they participated in the design and construction process, it was actually less expensive to build and get up and running. And so it advantaged everyone. It benefited the residents who already lived in the neighborhood. It advantaged the home builders by freeing up the opportunity to add the next phases of their subdivision, and commuting got easier. But too often, Madam Speaker, home builders are made out to be the bad guys. Too often, bureaucrats give them whiplash, changing the studies and the requirements that are needed to build, even throughout the process. Too often, politicians use them as whipping boys to cover up for their own failures and their failures to make the tough decisions. What we need, Madam Speaker, and what they need is a system that works, a system that's predictable, that's fair, and that is fast. And what residents need is an assurance that as new homes go up, the supporting infrastructure to build complete communities will be there when they move in or soon thereafter. You know, another story, Madam Speaker, from when I first got elected to City Council, there was a huge problem with parks. There was one park in particular, Vista Park. It was to be what the city called a community park. So a very, we're talking about 5, 6, 7 acre park. 7 years after the homes were built, the park was still an empty field. There wasn't even a concept plan for what the park would look like. So families had bought homes, paid a premium for their homes to be near the park, moved in, and 7 years later the park still hadn't been built. Their kids were now teenagers and didn't need a play structure anymore and a splash pad. They were into other things. And so the whole benefit of buying a nice house near a park was lost to them and their family. But we worked with the home builder to get that park built once I got elected, a park the city couldn't afford to build. And it actually unlocked funding for a second park. And in total, we built a dozen new parks while I was on council, and we built most of them working with the home building industry, working to get the parks and infrastructure built faster, while at the same time we worked to get their subdivisions approved faster. It was a win-win for everyone, Madam Speaker, and that's the type of thing the industry needs in order to get things built faster, in order to keep costs under control. By working together, we built complete communities, and we built a mix of housing within them to ensure that families of all shapes and sizes could afford to live there. So, Madam Speaker, this is where this bill really misses the mark. It says a lot about building homes faster, but almost nothing about building the things that make the neighborhoods livable, about the roads that connect new subdivisions to the rest of the city, about the recreation centres and district parks where our kids are going to play and learn to swim, the paramedics, the firefighters, and the police services that keep our neighborhoods safe. Right now, Madam Speaker, cities are struggling to keep up, especially when development charges are being capped or deferred. And that's a fiscal gap that legislation has created, but it has created a real-life service gap to these new homeowners. And it's a service gap that's only gotten worse over the last number of years. As some politicians and bureaucrats have made it harder and harder to get neighborhoods approved, as timelines have gone from months to years, and in some cases approaching a decade, it's no wonder that the costs have gone up, Madam Speaker, and it's no wonder that builders are more and more reluctant to do some of these extras to get infrastructure online faster. They have to be conscious of their own costs as well, Madam Speaker. In fact, just last week, I met with officials about getting a school site approved, a school site that this government has funded the construction of the school for. But the site isn't approved. A piece of land that was brought into the urban area of Ottawa 13 years ago has not yet received approval to start construction. A stormwater management issue and process that started 1 year before I left council, so going on 6 years now, still hasn't been solved. And this is to build a school that the government has already funded construction over. So, Madam Speaker, in Orleans, homes are going up, but the roads to serve them aren't being built. Families are stuck in traffic before they've even unpacked the boxes and moved in. And growth without infrastructure isn't progress, Madam Speaker. It's gridlock by design. You can't pave the way to new homes if you can't afford to pave the roads. And that's exactly what's happening across Ontario. As the government has continued to change planning rules, as they flip-flop back and forth 6 or 7 different pieces of legislation, each undoing progress that was said to have been made in the last, things have only gotten worse. And as they get more and more out of the business of funding local infrastructure, the problems get even worse beyond that. We're pushing growth, and the government's pushing growth, without really having a plan to support it. Thousands of new homes, thousands of new units are being approved without investing in the core infrastructure that makes those homes livable. And what's the result? The result is congestion that we can't get out of, schools that we can't get into, and emergency services that aren't keeping up. And at the end of the day, Madam Speaker, municipalities are being left to foot the bill, forced to stretch their budgets further and further and further and to defer the basics. We have in Ottawa, again, instead of investing in growth-related services like buying equipment to support new neighbourhoods, the City of Ottawa is using that money on other priorities, and new neighbourhoods are being left out. Madam Speaker, I've thought this for a long time, and I'm sure most people in here would agree with this, but it's sometimes something that we forget. A home isn't just 4 walls and a roof. It's the neighborhood that it's in. It's the schools, it's the parks, it's the recreation centers and the emergency services. And if we don't build those things alongside the homes, we're not really solving a crisis. We're just cementing the consequences. Some of these neighborhoods, some of these new neighborhoods that don't have these services are not living up to the middle-class dream that I think most of the people who bought those homes thought they were getting when they put their life savings down, Madam Speaker. And that's what the consequences look like. It means gridlock because thousands of new residents are funneled onto roads that are already over capacity. It means emergency response delays when the police, when fire, when paramedics can't get to where they need to go fast. It means overburdened schools where kids learn in portables for years while new buildings sit on a wish list. And it means recreation centers that are at full capacity or simply non-existent, leaving families with fewer and fewer options for healthy living. And Madam Speaker, perhaps the government might be more interested in this point. It means rising property taxes because municipalities are forced to play catch-up with yesterday's growth on today's budget. And these are not hypothetical problems. They are baked-in consequences when growth outpaces infrastructure investment. And if the government refuses to plan for both, then it's not building communities, it's going to simply build resentment. So let's be clear, when you greenlight the homes but ignore the services, you're not meeting the needs of families, you're creating frustration, you're creating gridlock, and you're creating decline by design. Now, Madam Speaker, the bill gives Queen's Park more control over planning and approvals. It limits what municipalities can ask for. Now, I remember a time, Madam Speaker, and I was reminded of this earlier this morning. I remember a time when the Premier of Ontario was in favour of green building standards for new home construction. And I'm not referring to a previous Premier of Ontario. I'm referring to the current Premier of Ontario, Madam Speaker. I'm told that, in fact, the current Premier of Ontario chaired the committee at the City of Toronto that marshalled those standards through and into force.
Who would have thought?
The Premier knew then what we all, I think, ought to know now. Energy efficiency standards save people money. A tighter building envelope means lower electricity bills and lower natural gas bills. Better stormwater management means reduced property taxes and lower condo fees. In an affordability crisis, Madam Speaker, helping Ontarians save on their monthly bills should be a top priority. Now, you might remember, Madam Speaker, that this government promised to cut hydro rates, but hydro bills are higher now than they've ever been. They're higher now even as families adapt to using less and less energy and become more energy efficient. So imagine a government that promised to reduce hydro rates actually now making it tougher for cities to help new homeowners have reduced hydro rates by making the building more hydro efficient. That's kind of like a double whammy. It's actually like a whopper, Madam Speaker. It's a whopper for new families. And, you know, as I mentioned, hydro bills are up and up and up. We also have to remember that the government voted to take HST off of those hydro bills. They voted to take HST off of natural gas and heating bills as well, a tax cut that would have saved families money each and every month. So as they are against allowing cities to help new homeowners make their energy bills and the envelope of their home more efficient, they're also at the same time against taking taxes off of those energy bills, tax savings that would save families hundreds of dollars a year. So, Madam Speaker, there are parts of this bill that I can support. Clarifying the zoning for schools, that's good. Standardizing the application requirements, that's not bad. Moving to get transit projects built, who could argue against that? But the bigger questions remain unanswered. How will cities fund the infrastructure that growth requires? What's the plan to close the gap between permits and pavement? And how will we make sure housing supply translates into real affordability for middle-class families? Because, Madam Speaker, the real test isn't how many permits can be issued. It's how many families can get the keys to a home that they can afford in a complete community where their kids will have an opportunity to learn, play, and grow up. So, Madam Speaker, the housing affordability crisis is only getting worse. And while the government has finally admitted they will not meet their goal of building 1.5 million new homes, I have to commend them for that. It takes courage to admit that you're failing. But more needs to be done, Madam Speaker. This bill won't fix the housing affordability crisis, and it won't dramatically change the number of homes that will be built. It won't finish the roads, and it won't build rec centres or close the gap between promise and delivery. But it's a nudge, Madam Speaker. It's a nudge. Now, it's a nudge when we need a leap, but it's a nudge nonetheless. The government needs to do more. They need to do better. And if they're serious about making home ownership real for Ontario's middle class, then they have to work together with everyone. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions? I recognize the member from Whitby.
Well, thank you, Speaker. And wanted to talk about timelines and accountability into the planning system, something that will resonate with the member from Orleans. Like I served for 13 years on the Whitby Town Council. 11 of those were for the Planning and Development Committee that I chaired. What our plan does do, though, what our plan does, give builders and municipalities a shared set of rules and clear timelines so housing applications don't get caught in the limbo that the member for Orleans saw, I saw, member from Niagara Centre saw, member from St. Catharines saw during their time on regional council. We all saw it. They're nodding tonight. Speaker, Ontarians deserve a system that works for the people, not one that rewards delay, and we've seen it. Does the opposition agree that timeframes and accountability are essential, or are they happy with business as usual? Thank you, Speaker.
The member for Orleans.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Yes, timelines and accountability are essential. As I mentioned in my remarks a number of times, the industry needs a clear set of timelines and a clear set of parameters that they're working to in order to build the homes that we need to support our growing population. But, Madam Speaker, the government has a responsibility to ensure that the money is there to build the infrastructure while the homes are being built, so that kids have schools to learn in, that they have rec centers to learn how to swim, that parks are there so they can learn how to ride their bike, so that people can walk down a sidewalk, so that police and fire and ambulance is close by. The government has a responsibility to invest in those services at the same time that the homes are being built. Thank you, Madam Speaker.